I spent much of my essential developmental time in the 1990s. That decade contained my high school, college, and entering the real world, as I say. For me, it was a time of significant growth that formed the base of who I was and who I've come to be. Probably some of the most significant influence was that in the realm of pop culture. Right? Dawn and I both look back at the 90s with great fondness. We love the TV shows, the movies, and the music from that era. And we lament, of course, as most people know, is how far things have gone bad. And I'm sure you all have your era of pop cultural significance. The times that you think about those were the good days, and when music was great and TV shows were good and movies were excellent. Now, that doesn't mean that everything in the 90s was spectacular. There are plenty of misses, movies that bombed, shows that were terrible, music groups that tarnished that beautiful landscape of harmonious expression. For me, one of the most annoying singer-songwriters from that time was someone known as Sheryl Crow. How many people are familiar with Sheryl? All right. For some reason, her angsty music littered that modern rock radio station all the time. You couldn't go an hour without hearing, how she wanted to soak up the sun or have a little fun before she dies. But perhaps the most annoying was "If It Makes You Happy." Anyone remember that one? If it makes you happy, it can't be that bad. If it makes you happy, why the heck are you so sad? All right. This chorus, though, it kind of encapsulates the mindset of maybe my generation, but of people in general. I think it speaks of a self-centered pursuit for private happiness. If it makes you happy, it can't be that bad. But we also discover that this striving for this personal happiness leaves us empty and longing inside, because if it makes you happy, then why are you so sad? And this song comes in utter contrast to the psalm that we look at today, Psalm 128, the Psalm of Blessing, which sings about the spiritual practice of fearing the Lord, which leads to the abundant blessing of sacrificial living. When we sing Psalm 128, we discover a happy and blessed life for those who follow God and seek the prosperity of others. It begins with, "Happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. The one who fears the Lord will be blessed. You will see the prosperity of Jerusalem." Like all other Jewish children, Zacchaeus would travel with his family to a pilgrimage to the temple. His childhood was a precious time, filled with a loving family and cheerful memories. He remembered as they would sing these songs as they made their way to Jerusalem, the songs of ascent, these 15 worship songs that speak of God's love and mercy and power and blessing. These songs would prepare the hearts of the people of Israel as they would remember the great works of the Lord during their festivals of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacle. At that time, Zach's favorite song was the Song of Blessing. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord. He loved, and they would sing of God's blessings, even though he didn't really understand what it meant to fear the Lord. He knew he wanted to experience God's blessing. He knew that one day he would grow and he would see the prosperity of Jerusalem. And so the song filled his heart. It filled his heart, and he would sing with joy and believe the promise that you will be happy and it will go well with you. But as Zach grew older, his body refused to grow up. All the other boys were having growth spurts, and he was having growth whimpers. Soon his peers would be towering over him. And all kids at that age can be ruthless and be like, "Hey, Tiny Z, how's the weather down there?" They would laugh at him, mock him, hurl insults on him at a regular basis. He hoped that eventually this joking would stop, but it would seem relentless. Eventually, the seeds of bitterness began to blossom in his heart. His short hike turned to a short fuse. Zacchaeus was filled with hurt and anger, a far cry from that happiness given to those who fear the Lord. He soon dismissed the notion that a blessed life would come from following God and embraced the idea that he had that to make his own happiness. And he would stop singing, "Happy is everyone who fears the Lord," and start singing, "If it makes me happy, it can't be that bad." And after a lifetime of being the butt of the jokes, Zach had had enough. He took a position as the chief tax collector. Aside from the Roman soldiers, this was the most despised person in all of Israel. No one would understand why anyone would want to work for the oppressors. But after being mocked his entire life, he thought he'd find satisfaction in making his tormentors pay, literally. He hoped that he would find happiness in their pain and misery. He got a thrill out of seeing them swarm when they couldn't pay their taxes, along with the extensive processing fee he would add to their bill. "Who's a little short now?" he would snicker. With all that, all that satisfaction he thought he would get from seeing them suffer, it never brought him true happiness. But if it makes him happy, then why is he so sad? After years of hurt, Zacchaeus was lost he lost the understanding of true happiness. See, the world tells us that happiness is found in ourselves, that we find commitment when we look inward, seeking to satisfy our own desires. We have this idea that my pleasure is more important than your pain. So we push and pull and scream and yell. We take advantage of others. We manipulate situations to find our happiness. Because if it makes me happy, it can't be that bad. We pursue worldly happiness with selfish endeavor. We see husbands leaving their wives for someone younger to make them happy. People turn to the bottle to bring some sort of pleasure into their pain. We waste hours on various screens, TVs, phones, movies, or computers to escape the problems of our lives. We gorge on food, indulge in sex. We seek extreme thrills so that we can find our happy spot. But if it makes us happy, then why are we so sad? Depression, addiction, divorce, brokenness, pain, loneliness. These become the results of us seeking the world's happiness. Zacchaeus spent a life seeking after this worldly happiness. He thought that acquiring wealth would satisfy his soul. But there was an emptiness inside him. He thought this vindication would bring him joy, seeing the people that made his growing up miserable squirm under his oppressive hand would bring him pleasure. But it didn't. He thought that buying friendships with the local prostitutes and sinners would bring enjoyment to his life. But these relationships were shallow and meaningless. What did it profit him to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? After all his frivolous searching, there was no happiness. Now, there were times where he would lay awake at night, and that song of blessing would fill his mind. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. The happiness seemed to have eluded in most of his life. He had a faint memory of a time that he would travel with his parents to Jerusalem. But those days were over, a shadow of memory. He had traveled too far from God. There was no way he could ever find true happiness again. When we sing Psalm 128, the song of blessing, though, we understand that our Creator designed us for true happiness and true blessing. But our sinful nature works extensively at keeping us from experiencing this happiness. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord. who walks in his ways. The one who fears the Lord will be blessed. The psalmist is making it abundantly clear that to experience true happiness, true blessings in your life, our first step is to fear the Lord. Now, our thoughts or instincts might lead us to think that we are to be afraid of God. That God has got this wrath that he's going to pour out on us if we don't do what he says. When we look at the Old Testament, sometimes we think that there's this vengeful God who kicks Adam and Eve out of Israel or out of the garden. He sends a flood to wipe out humanity. He causes verbal confusion at the Tower of Babel. He sends plagues on the Egyptians. He attacks the wandering Israelites with serpents. He allows foreign nations to oppress God's people. When we take these stories out of the greater context of the biblical narrative, it might lead us to be terrified of God, thinking that God will smite us. Zach had searched for happiness, and it had left him sad and alone. It was true, money can't buy you happiness. In fact, it did the exact opposite. But then one day, he heard about a rabbi named Jesus. The stories always made something inside of him stir. Was it anger or hope? Was it joy or sorrow? Wasn't sure, but he had to see it. He needed to get a glimpse of this man. The problem was twofold. Well, first, he was hated by everyone that was around him. Any attempt to go out into a crowd would put his life into jeopardy. But that's not only that, even if he was able to get out into the crowd, there's no way he would be able to see Jesus. Once again, his height, or lack thereof, would be his downfall. But suddenly he had this idea, some harebrained scheme that would probably leave him injured or humiliated. Zach decided to climb that sycamore tree right outside of his house. He hadn't climbed the trees since he was a kid. But he was still little. But adults don't climb trees. Still, there was something pushing him forward, propelling him up that tree. He grabbed one branch, and pulled himself up, then another, and pulled himself higher. Finally, he found himself able to look out above the crowd to see Jesus coming. And as he looked at the crowd, something strange happened. The crowd shifted, started veering. It looked like they were headed straight toward him. His eyes must be off. Maybe the climb and the height had altered his perspective. Maybe the air was thinner up there at the top of the tree. There was no way that Jesus would be heading towards his house. But sure enough, the people were coming this way. And soon they began to gather around that tree. Thank God they didn't look up. Except Jesus looked up and said, "Hey, Zacchaeus." He must be referring to someone else. I mean, there's got to be 100 Zacchaeuses right now, right? "Hey, Zacchaeus, yeah, you up on the tree. Come down from that tree. I'm going to your house today." Now, Zach was afraid. What was Jesus going to do? Was he going to humiliate him even more? Was he going to use him as an example of God's wrath and fear? Is that what it means to fear the Lord? Do we need to be terrified of God in order to find happiness and blessings in our lives? Well, let's turn to our friend Eugene Peterson in his book to help us understand this more. He writes what it means to fear God. He says, fear God, reverence might be a better word. Awe. He is majestic and holy, vast and wondrous. The Bible talks of the fear of the Lord, not to scare us, but to bring us to awesome attention before the overwhelming grandeur of God. To shut up our whining and chattering and stop our running and fidgeting so that we can really see him as he is and listen to him as he speaks his merciful, life-changing words of forgiveness. To fear the Lord does not mean that we should be shaking in our boots at the thought of God, but that we should take a humble position, understanding and respecting that God is greater than we will ever be. He's not a genie that we can go to demand that he grants our wishes. We approach God with genuineness and sincerity, knowing that his thoughts are not our thoughts and his ways are not our ways. Yet because of his loving compassion, we can come to his throne and receive mercy and grace in the time of our need. The psalmist appeals to those who are searching for happiness in this life and encourages us to fear the Lord, to come to God with awe, reverence, and humility. And as we come to God with the right heart and the right mindset, we begin to walk in his way. Reverence and obedience go hand in hand. As Jesus tells us, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided for you. Those who fear and follow the Lord will experience godly happiness and blessing. So, what does this happiness and blessing look like for us? From our experience, we know that the worldly happiness eventually leaves us empty. As Pastor Dale Johnson, he says that our happy is related to our happening, which means happiness comes and goes as a favorable happenings come and go. So our search for happiness needs to come from something outside of our happenings if we want to experience God's blessing. When we join in singing the song of blessing, we proclaim our desire and our searching for happiness is not found in accumulating wealth or possessions or personal pleasures. Spiritual blessings is a gift from the Lord for those who trust and obey. The blessings we sing about in Psalm 128 come from God's character, because he is gracious and compassionate and desires to pour out his blessings on all of us. Yet those blessings can only be truly received and enjoyed by those who live in good relationship with him. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus helps us understand who it is that really experiences God's blessings. Because what we refer to as the Beatitudes, Jesus tells us that the people who receive God's blessings are the poor in spirit, the mourning, the humble, those who are longing for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers and the persecuted. They are the ones who truly understand God's happiness, God's blessing. They experience the blessing given to them by God because they fear God and they walk in his way. And the blessings they receive aren't this prosperity and wealth for ourselves. Jesus tells us that they receive this type of blessing. They gain access to the kingdom of heaven. They have spiritual comfort. They inherit the earth. They're filled with righteousness. They experience mercy and justice, and they see God. As Peterson explains, Jesus makes it clear that the way of discipleship is not a reduction of what we already are, not taking things from our lives, not a subtraction for what we are used to. Rather, Jesus will expand our capacity and fill us with life so that we can overflow with joy. Hey, Zach, come down from that tree. I'm going to your house today. No one, especially Zacchaeus, could believe what was happening. Yet somehow he made his way to the ground without breaking his neck and invited Jesus into his home. Zach had not had a real conversation with someone except for paying their taxes in years. He didn't know what to say at first, but that didn't stop Jesus. And soon they sat and talked for hours and hours. Zacchaeus had not experienced happiness in years, but all of a sudden, joy was overflowing. In our song of blessing, the psalmist paints a picture of what a blessed life looks like. Verse 3, it says, your wife will be filled with will be like a fruitful vine within the house, and your children like young olive trees around your table. Does this mean that that only those who have fertile wives and healthy children experience God's blessings and happiness? Well, if that's so, most of us would be left off the list. But we need to understand that the psalmist is using poetic language to help us understand God's blessings and how they increase in our lives. God's blessings are pregnant in our lives and gives birth to additional blessings. As Peterson points out, that blessing has inherent in its power to increase. It functions by sharing and delighting in life. The characteristic of blessing is to multiply. Soon that song filled Zach's heart, the song that he had not sung in years. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his way. The man who fears the Lord will be blessed. Suddenly, Zacchaeus was blessed. After spending a few hours, he knew that his pursuit of happiness in the face of others was only leaving him empty. But now, after meeting Jesus, his life had changed. He was a new man, a blessed man, a man who now feared the Lord, and he knew what he had to do. He stood up and declared, Jesus, I want to give away half my possessions to the poor. And if I've wronged anyone, and I know I have, I will pay 4 times as much. The blessings from God that lead to happy life are not quantifiable here on earth, but they're abundant in the kingdom of heaven. When we fear the Lord and walk in his ways, we are filled with blessings from God, overflowing with joy. The Psalms of blessings continue to reiterate the blessings of the Lord that are not from selfish gain or personal desires. They are for the prosperity of others. May the Lord bless you from Zion so that you will see the prosperity of Jerusalem. God's blessings and happiness are poured out on his people for the prosperity of others. As Peterson reminds us, Christian blessing is a realizing that it's more blessed to give than to receive. As we learn to give and to share, our vitality increases and the people around us become fruitful vines and olive shoots at our tables. To the shock of everyone, including Zacchaeus, Jesus proclaimed, salvation has come to this house. The blessing of God had been given to this tax collector who discovered what it meant to fear the Lord and to walk in his way. Zacchaeus learned to sing Psalm 128 again. This time, the song was much deeper than it was when he was a kid. It resonated with his soul and reverberated in his life. No longer was he seeking his own gain, but the prosperity of others. Righting his wrongs and giving to those in need, fearing the Lord and walking in his way. Zach was truly experiencing God's blessing. And if Zach can, we can too. Maybe you've gotten lost in seeking the pleasures of earth, singing that other song, if it makes me happy, it can't be that bad. Your focus on your selfish desires has left a void in your soul because those things are making you happy, then why are you so sad? Maybe it's time to stop seeking your personal happiness and look toward the blessing of others. Instead of honoring your desires, fear the Lord, walk in his way. This morning we will celebrate communion. We'll gather around and we'll remember the selfless life of Jesus, who humbled himself and became one of us, not to seek his own happiness, but to show us God's blessing. Jesus, through his sacrifice on the cross, has blessed us. He's blessed us from Zion. We, as Christians, we are to see the prosperity of Jerusalem, of his people. Because of his grace and mercy, God's salvation has been given to us and to our children, and to our children's children. Salvation that is in the name of the Lord. True prosperity, true blessings and happiness can be ours through Jesus. Those who fear the Lord and walk in his way. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his way. You will surely eat what your hands have worked for. You will be happy, and it will go well with you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house, your children like young olive trees around your table. In this very way, the man who fears the Lord will be blessed. May the Lord bless you from Zion, so that you will see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life, and you will see your children's children. Peace be with Israel. Amen.